I think this is such a wonderful, do you get that? Is that moment when she plugged it in and it wasn't ordinary anymore? Well, my reflection today is really about how we may appear to one another to be ordinary, but when we are plugged in to the presence of God, we light up too. Okay. I want to give you a couple of examples. A man goes for a walk in the woods, across the fields and into the woods. And it's one of those days when the sun, the weather, whatever, is just kind of really still and beautiful. And he writes about the fact that as he stands out there in the midst of the trees, looking at the sky, he has this sense of kind of being connected to everything. It's kind of like the light sort of shimmers off the trees, and there's a stillness, and maybe he notices the bark on a certain tree he never noticed before. Maybe he hears a bird he doesn't normally hear. But he has this sense that he's sort of stepped out of ordinary time a little bit. Any of you ever have that experience? Just in your everyday life? Then, recently, someone recounted this story to me. They said they were at a church service, and the service was being conducted by a good friend of theirs. And all of a sudden, the person in the pews, looking at his friend up front at the altar, noticed that there were other figures around his friend. He saw them. And he looked around the rest of the congregation to see if anybody else was looking strange, scratching their head, poking somebody else. You see that? But everybody else looked just the same. The next day, his friend who had been conducting the service died. And this man had a very strong sense that he had seen some of that cloud of witnesses who were coming to take his friend home. Some of you may remember that I work at hospice. And one of our massage therapists was telling me one day that when she goes in to work with people who are very close to death, she sometimes experiences what's around them, the energy. And that, she said, sometimes when people are troubled, it's very dark. But sometimes when people have great peace, or the peace comes through her working with them and massaging away some of their pain, the room gets lighter. Many times we have patients who, as they are in the process of dying, they'll be in the bed, there'll be maybe one other person in the room, and suddenly they're looking up to the corner of their room. Mama, Daddy, Mary, Carol. They see things we don't see. When I was a small child, I remember this experience. I lived in a small town, and we had one of those old-fashioned playgrounds with the swing you'd get on, and you'd push each other high as you could. And one of our teachers came out, and because he was a tall man and had more strength than the other kids, of course, I went higher on the swing. Now, I was kind of a serious child. I came from a family that had a lot of loss and grief, etc., and so I was a little bit serious. And I remember this day. It was one of those lovely spring days when the air is real soft, and you know summer's coming and school's going to be out pretty soon. And as this teacher pushed me, I went higher up, and big old-fashioned playground still had the big trees, and I swang right into the edge of the leaves on the tree. And it was like I was in this magical green world. And this feeling came over me of just complete joy. And I knew that I was okay, and that life would be okay. That has stayed with me for probably 60 years. that moment. Now, why do I share some of these things with you? It's because all of these experiences are out of what we would call our ordinary everyday life. And the church, the Christian church, other people too, call these mystical experiences. That doesn't mean you're crazy. It means that you are touching into a deeper, broader, larger reality. We could say that we really are touching the presence of God. The presence of God is here. It's all around us. It's in each of us. But often we're not aware of it. We're just caught up in, oh gosh, got to pay the taxes, I got to do this, got to do that, got to get my homework done, oh my gosh, so-and-so going to ask me to the prom, am I going to pass algebra, blah, blah. So we get caught up in that naturally, and we're just not aware that there's more going on around us. But anytime you have an experience where you just have a sense of a broader, wider, bigger, deeper world, that is a deeper touching into the presence of God. And you often will have a sense of awe or saying, wow, I'm just not usually aware of these things. I think it's interesting that such a common word now in our vocabulary is the word awesome. This is an awesome pizza. Or I think since the popularity of Amazing Grace as a song, I hear people say, wow, that was an amazing whatever the experience was. But just to be aware at a deeper place in yourself that God is with you and that more is going on. Now, Jesus took these 3 disciples with him up to the mountain because he wanted to reveal to them that this deeper relationship he had with his Father is what fueled him, what kept him going. Sometimes in the church we emphasize the part which Kathy did about kind of the disciples being given the evidence with the voice coming out of the cloud, this is my son, with the appearance of Moses and Elijah. Remember, they have both been dead a very long time by the time Jesus appears in history. So in one sense, the church has really emphasized, well, this shows the specialness of Jesus. But it also shows that Jesus wants us to understand that just as he was filled with the Spirit of his Father, he wants us to be filled with his Spirit, so that in a sense, we also glow. Remember Paul's writing in the New Testament, it is not I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. So that's like we are each of us like this tree in some ways, but when the presence of God is not only in us, but we begin to be aware of it, we start to light up like this. And that's really important. Now, this radiance, they called it radiance, comes out in Jesus, but it can come out in all of us. Here's an experiment. I want you to just look at somebody sitting around you. Just pick, don't have to get up, don't have to do anything else, but just notice somebody else, okay? Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to fold your arms like this and not have a smile on your face and just look at that other person. What I want you to do is I want you to feel that sort of shut down feeling, like I'm not going to talk to you. I'm in my own world, Now do the opposite. Just put your arms out and smile at the same person you weren't smiling at. See the difference? You feel the difference in the energy, right? Right? So when we're open, a beautiful image I use a lot in prayer is if I'm praying for somebody or I'm praying for myself, I open my arms like this. I picture Jesus standing right behind me with that radiant light coming out of him and going right into me and then out into the world. Okay? It's not about my ego. It's not that I want to be the shiniest one in the town. It's that I want that love to come through me as one human being out into the world. And so will you see how when you reach out to each other, you connect, that energy, that light is going between everybody. And that's a really beautiful thing. Now, think about whatever it is you do in life. Maybe you work in a store and you wait on customers. I don't even have to begin to describe to you the difference between someone who comes in and is grumpy and someone who comes in and is pleasant, right? And how much effort, it's much easier to be pleasant back to someone who's pleasant to you. It's harder if a person seems upset, this thing didn't work and I'm bringing it back and I want my money. That can make us kind of start to shrivel up inside. That's the moment to imagine the light of Christ coming into you and going out into that person or into that situation. Let's say you teach. You're in a classroom. All those cute little kids here, all that energy. How important is it for the teacher, the aides in the classroom, whoever, again, to be open to those children and to have a radiance that those children pick up? If I ask you, I bet every single one of you looking back across your life, whether you're 12 or 85, could remember somebody in your life who made you kind of uptight, they were kind of scary, and somebody that you just loved to be with them or go to their house, or, they were just warm. They were filled with light, and you felt so good around them. People who provide health care. Oh my gosh, I think of all the people who take care of sick people. Just the really down, nitty-gritty work, changing people's diapers, That's not easy work. And you got to have a certain kind of radiance to do that. And putting up with, people who say 10 times a day, did I take my pill? Did I take my pill? Because they can't remember. It takes tremendous love and patience and radiance. Let's say you're a long-distance truck driver, and you're out there on the road, and boy, you could get really, really bored. Can you pray for the radiance to always stop at certain places on your route where you get to know the people who run the restaurant, in the store, the truck stop? I don't know what truckers do now. I know they used to do CB radios so they could communicate with each other. And do you take the time to sort of see the beauty of the land you're going through? Can you make that? Can you ask God to help you make that a radiant experience? Jesus wants us to be open to his Spirit living in us, just like he was open to this transfiguring power and energy from God his Father. I like the word which I have read in some text studies of this passage, shimmering. Do you think of radiance, shimmering? So it is in our relationship with Christ that we have the opportunity to have this power, this energy, this light, this radiance shimmer in us, so that when people encounter us, they are fed spiritually. They are given something. And that's completely different than if you are a very shut down, dark, heavy person. Now, some of you might be old enough to remember a famous song of the jazz era, which I think was called "Can You Shimmy Like My Sister Kate?" Anybody ever heard of that song? That was what was considered, I think, a quite wild dance in that era. And that just came to me as I was doing this sermon, and I thought, well, that's very close to the word, shimmy was a dance, and that was very close to the word shimmer. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Every morning you get up, stand tall as you can, take a deep breath, and say, I want to be filled with your light and your love today, Jesus. And I want to shimmer like my Savior. Okay. Amen.